All right, let's take a look at our final lecture. And really, this is just a series of discussion prompts after a relatively brief refresher on conflict theory. But our last topic, our last discussions of the semester are on sports and gender. So let's do a quick refresher on conflict theory. The general premise is that society is filled with haves and have-nots, millions of have-nots, very few at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, and that the system is built to allow the rich, the wealthy really, to control everything. It's all about power. The structures in place are in place to maintain the status quo and further enrich the powerful. And then within this, the individual, social group, and institutions where everything is really played out. For the individual, there's relatively no power. They effectively serve as cogs in the wheel of production, meaning they are good workers and good audience members that continue to enhance the wealthy, the upper class, the elite, financially elite in society, the powerful. Social groups mostly exist to support the status quo as well. So they are sort of a middle manager to help control the individuals, to get them back in line if they ever step out of line and challenge things too much. And again, less power to actually sort of rise up and change the whole system. Their power is more in terms of maintaining the status quo, which gets us to our final element of our power dynamic here is the power of larger institutions. Everything works to maintain wealth of the wealthy, the power of the powerful, and that really is an institutional level of control. Feminism in sports in relation to conflict theory. Again, it's all about maintaining power imbalance. So you deny access to resources for female athletes. You deny structural support. They have a lower cultural prestige. There's social pressure to be feminine, and these conflicting and possible cultural norms of athleticism within sports, but also not being too strong or not losing femininity or sex appeal or whatever any of these might mean. The conflicting norm of both being super strong but not that strong at the same time is an impossible task to manage. Of how can one be both strong and not strong? Obviously, those are opposites. So the introduction piece or an introduction to this, sort of where we're coming from. Previous generations of female athletes were sort of relegated to aesthetic sports, perhaps gymnastics or figure skating, things like that. Additionally, non-contact sports like badminton, golfing, bowling, and then when they were able to get into more physically exertion of physical energy, it's for short sort of stints. So they were allowed to run sprints. They were allowed to play 6-on-6 basketball. For those who don't know or have never witnessed it, there's 3 players on the offensive end for a team, and that same team has 3 players on the defensive side of half court, and they can't cross over half court. So there's 3 that are they were called guards. So they were just on defense the whole time, and 3 forwards that were just on offense the whole time. And they had to pass the ball over half court. They couldn't actually cross over. Part of the reason for this was that it was seen a full court game of basketball was just too I don't know, physically stressful or straining for a female athlete, which obviously is just nonsensical, but that's where it was. So this is the background of where things were coming from. Prior to all of this, aesthetic sports or non-contact sports or short exertion sports, women just didn't have any sports. So I guess this was a stepping stone to a better day, but this is a little bit of history of where things have been. In addition to all of this, there was a cycle of status. So women never got to play men's sports. When they did get to play, they were judged for not being as good as men's sports, but how could they possibly have been as good if they'd never gotten to play prior to this? But then, as a result of perhaps not being as good, that was used as a justification to not let them play in the first place. So which brings us back to the sort of step 1 of that, of not getting to play. Additionally, as all of our sports were being developed over the centuries, structure and support was always built around male sports and male athletes first. So the entire structure itself was built around maleness, masculinity, and the supports and the resources that male athletes would need. And female athletes came in sort of as a secondary thought once they actually got to start playing in the first place. All right, this brings us to Title IX at age 40 and at 40 plus now. And there's still some confusion about what Title IX is, what it's intended to do. It was actually to ensure equal educational opportunities. So that's why we see it always tied to our educational systems, not necessarily professional athletes, but college, high school, lower levels, especially public colleges and public high schools. So there's an undeniable success for Title IX based on statistics, particularly at high school level and lower, where we're seeing many more girls getting the opportunity to participate in sports as part of their larger development, educational process, whatever you want to call it. The numbers there are undeniable of where we were prior to Title IX to where we are now. The challenge, though, is in many ways, Title IX hasn't trickled up to college, or certainly not onto professional levels. Colleges may be trying to sort of adhere to the broad standards of it, but we see we're continually reminded of the sort of the haves and have-nots in college sports, whether it's the women's March Madness fiasco or the 2021 Women's Championship, where social media really took off about the weight room and facilities for female athletes and participating in March Madness versus all of the amenities and resources for male athletes in their 2021 championship. There or anywhere else, there's thousands of examples over the years that we might look at as examples of where Title IX hasn't quite hit its mark as much on the college levels, and certainly not the professional levels, which again, professional levels aren't tied with the education system, aren't public education systems, so they can operate legally with different standards and things like that. The goal would be, of course, that everybody has equal opportunity and equal resources across the board, but certainly not at the professional levels, and maybe kind of mixed or nuanced results in the collegiate levels. So it has been and continues to be a long road toward equality here. So let's learn a little bit more about Title IX compliance in the first place. So there's 3 prongs in an institution must meet at least one of these. The first prong is proportionality in relation to the student body. So this is where we see some sports being added, some sports being dropped, some opportunities rising up, especially in the initial implementation of Title IX, where we have a bunch of male sports and not that many female sports or programs being offered. We did see the drastic increase of female sports being offered and therefore female athletes participating. So we see that right away. And then over time, it has been the case that depending on how the numbers go, a male sport would be dropped to maintain proper proportionality, especially as budgets tighten. Oftentimes we see a male sport being dropped to reach rather than adding a female sport when budgets might not allow for additional sports to be happening. So there's some nuance to that, but it's at least easy enough to sort of wrap our heads around. The second and third prongs are much harder to sort out, let alone assess to see if you are being compliant with Title IX. The second one is history and continuance of program expansion. So this one might have been easier when Title IX first was implemented and programs were being launched. So we can show a track record of like we're launching a new team sport every 18 months or something like that. You can show a history of program expansion, but now that it's been around a while and educational institutions kind of are where they got to the point of compliance based on expansion, and now they're focused more on the proportionality prong rather than continued expansion. And then third is meet the interests and abilities of underrepresented groups. This one's super duper hard to define. You would effectively have to survey all of your students every year, perhaps, to see what their interests and abilities are. And imagine running a Big East athletic department and you aren't sure what sports are going to be available for the next year because you haven't completed your survey yet. So you maybe get everything ready for 1 year, do another survey or another assessment of interests and abilities, and they pick different sports for the next year. all the nightmares of trying to get facilities and coaches and schedules and everything in place for large athletic conferences. Just not really feasible to do this, certainly not annually. Perhaps, I don't know, maybe once a decade you could do that, but even then schedules and everything get built out so far in advance, and the whole structure of coaching and recruiting and all of that makes this the third one almost an impossibility. And along with the second prong, very sort of confusing, really challenging in terms of assessment and to see if you're being compliant. So almost all institutions go with that first one, that proportionality. It's the easiest to wrap your head around. It's easiest to do an assessment to see if you're being compliant with Title IX. All right, this moves us into the great debate of sports media perspectives of sports media. First round, we're going to be talking about Title IX. Second round, we're talking about Tiger Girls. And the third round, we're talking about sports and manly men. For this, I want you to think about the arguments for and counter arguments, or the arguments against each of the sides, so to speak. Okay, so round one, talking about Title IX. Some arguments. Women's sports don't and can't pay for themselves. So this is sort of a truth in many cases that most women's sports aren't self-sustaining. To be honest, most men's sports aren't self-sustaining. They need either tuition or donation or other money-generating sports to help cover them. But the argument has often been made that women's sports can't support or pay for themselves. An argument's also made that men's sports have been cut for Title IX reasons. So the envisioning or the application of Title IX to the athletic realm wasn't intended to be a reason for cutting sports. It was the intention behind it was we add more sports rather than cut sports. But it has been the case, especially since most institutions are moved to that proportionality prong. That to get that proportionality, sometimes men's sports are cut, and certainly the ones that can't pay for themselves, you wouldn't be cutting a money generating athletic program. So the argument also is that football and men's basketball at most, and we're talking college here more than anything, pays for everyone else. But large high schools, I suppose, would be a pretty similar revenue stream. Football and men's basketball pay for everyone. So lacrosse, soccer, anything else at most institutions aren't money generating. And the argument is that it is all about money. Okay, so here's our fourth discussion prompt, and you're arguing both sides. And then after you present an argument for both sides, then state your view, which side you tend to lean toward, or if it's some sort of middle ground, just explain kind of where you land on the issue. So one side is keep Title IX the same. It's offered decades of opportunity and access to resources. And then the second argument is that no, Title IX was a good start, but it is no longer as applicable or no longer getting the job done. It needs improvements in X, Y, and Z, and the old system is not working. So argue both sides of that Title IX is great, keep it the same. It's done so well over the years. And the second one is, no, it's not good anymore. It needs improvement and X, Y, and Z. And here are the areas that it needs improvement. Take that on for your discussion prompt. And then remember after you present both sides, give your own sort of view on where it's at. So for the first side of it, or for the first part of it, you're really stepping outside of your own personal view and laying out the arguments on both sides. And then the second part is where you present your own view. Okay, take a minute on the discussion posts to take on prompt 4 and then come back. All right, on to Tiger Girls on the soccer field. So again, Tiger moms and dads place girls into competitive, aggressive sports to ensure executive level potential. So we're getting into an argument about nature versus nurture. So our executives and perhaps the necessary aggression or leadership or willingness to kind of put your ideas out there and go for something, is that, are we born with that, or is that something that's built into us over time? That's really the question that we're at here. So the arguments are, and again, just like the last one, argue both sides and then present yours. The sport makes the woman. So the playing aggressive sports and developing those skills will make the female more successful in executive level, whatever, business, life. The Tiger moms and dads and the examples we're looking most likely into sort of high finance, high business types of careers. But back to our discussion prompt. The sport instills that drive, that aggression, that competitiveness, or the other side of that would be the woman is who she is, and sports don't play that much of a role. So those who are aggressive and competitive and leaders in boardrooms and things like that are sort of born that way, and then continue on, whether it's through sports or anything else, and then ultimately end up there based on their just innate traits. So argue both sides of this, and then after you get through your presentation of arguments, present your view, and then come back. All right. Our third round is a continuation of that nature versus nurture discussion, focusing on the sanctity of Sundays. So this is really about male culture, football, but sports more broadly. The two sides here is that sports and society make men, in effect, teaching them how to be masculine or hypermasculine, which would be an argument for nurture, that men aren't inherently that way, that sports builds that into them. And then the other side is men are inherently that way. They are naturally inclined to like sports because of sort of their nature, evolution of mankind, testosterone, expressions of hypermasculinity in the past, as perhaps if we go way back in our evolution of mate selection and things like that, domination of a group of humans, and being the alpha, things, all sorts of concepts like that tied in with nature and evolution. So your two arguments here are that sports and society put that into us, us being men, teaching us how to be masculine, or men are naturally inclined to like sports because of all of the things that are sort of built into them, and that's why they gravitate toward them. So argue both sides, and then again, present your view on where you land on the issue. And that is it for your final lecture of the semester. Be sure to submit your discussion posts by Thursday, and yeah, keep up the good work on your final papers.